I'm contacted by people on a regular basis who believe that their devices have been compromised and that they're being stalked and spied on. Sometimes they've misinterpreted what they're looking at, but sometimes they're actually being digitally stalked. Find out the signs of Stalkerware and what to do about it in this episode. Our guest today is John Bambenek. John is the Vice President of Security Research and Intelligence at ThreatSTOP. He is the President of Bambenek Consulting, where he provides forensics, penetration testing, auditing, and managed security services. He has spoken at numerous security conferences, including Black Hat. He has spent 20 years tracking cybercrime and helping to bring criminals to justice. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Prey Podcast. All right, John, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Prey Podcast. I appreciate you spending some time with our audience today. Mm-hmm. Can you give the audience a little background as to where you come from and what you're currently doing?
Sure. Currently, I work as Vice President of Security Research and Intelligence at ThreatSTOP. I also have my own consulting firm, Bambenek Consulting. I've been working in cybersecurity pretty much my entire career, ever since I left college. I probably got my start earlier in security before that, at 8 or 9 years old, cheating at video games. And not wanting to grind for whatever shiny sword or gold or whatever, and just going into hex editors and just giving myself all the equipment I wanted. And, that apparently turned into a fairly lucrative, decades-long career in cybersecurity.
I very much remember on the Commodore 64 going into the disk editor and upping my character's stats like, hey, I want to be a first-level character with 255 this, 255 that. I remember those days.
Yeah. Computer games are supposed to be fun. Why am I grinding for 40 hours to have fun? That sounds like work.
It definitely was at those times. I was, me and my brothers were really happy to find a file editor when we were kids and save ourselves many hours of our summer wasting time.
Yep.
So running whatismyipaddress.com, I get a lot of people coming to me saying, hey, I think I've been hacked. I think someone's on my devices and snooping and listening to what I'm doing and intercepting my emails, intercepting my text messages. And often when I'm looking at them, they start showing me what they're looking at. And it turns out that they're mistaking what they're seeing in their Google access. They see, 4 different Verizon wireless IP addresses, and it doesn't match their current one. So they assume that, someone else has hacked into their account when it's probably just a history of them accessing their account. But I know that there are stalkerware packages out there, and this is a legitimate concern for people going through divorces, people running companies. Can you give me a background of kind of like what stalkerware is?
Sure. In essence, it's almost the biggest variety of it is a malicious mobile app put on your phone. And if you think about information of, I want to track somebody's movements, I want to know who they're talking to, who they're emailing, who they're texting, they having an affair or whatever, your phone is the device that's most likely to have that. There's a lot of different ways. We call it stalkerware because probably the most conventional use case is, somebody you have a relationship with or did at one point in time. But it goes all the way up the spectrum. There was a case I worked on in South America involving a politician who was assassinated who had malware on his phone that could have been used to track his movements. And then there was a bit of work, on, if that tied to those who assassinated him. Mm-hmm. And certainly business executives and the like, there's lots of concern of back when people traveled, right, of bringing mobile devices with them to countries that don't necessarily have our view of privacy and freedom that we do in the Western world. So I know I've traveled to interesting places and took precautions. And basically that involves getting a burn phone, having my wife's phone number in it, and basically chucking it in the trash when I came back to the States because, well, it was a cheap burn phone. It did the job of me being able to talk to my wife and kids when I was overseas. Mm-hmm. Some of it's real, and obviously there's a lot that can be also misinterpreted.
So let's talk about that. What are the signs that people see that lead them to think there's stalkerware on their phone? What are legitimate signs of stalkerware, and what are not legitimate signs of stalkerware?
Odds are, the legitimate signs of the times that I've talked to people about it is, it's usually not an aberration, meaning, whoever installed Stalkerware on your phone, and then that's all they did. Right. That's part of a large abusive relationship. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's being controlling, doesn't like who you're talking to, they show up at places where you are. I mean, if it's a spouse, it's a little bit harder, right? Because usually your spouse knows who you are, but if you're in a dating relationship and all of a sudden you see somebody you broke up with 2 months ago who keeps showing up when you're taking vacations, then, you've got some indications that they're following your movements. And obviously there's some ways to do that without Stalkerware, right? People have Instagram and Facebook and people might create fake accounts just to keep track of what you're doing. The whole Facebook creeping on exes. Some people take that to the next level, but it's usually not just installing Stalkerware. You'll see some other indications that somebody is actively malicious towards you.
Mm-hmm. So I know one of the things that I often see that leads me to believe that it's incorrect is those, multiple Verizon IP addresses when it's the same user accessing their Google account. What are some of the signs that you would say that people mistakenly believe are signs of Stalkerware that probably aren't?
Well, I think when people who aren't doing cybersecurity start saying, "Oh, I want to see all of the IP addresses on phones that are connecting to it," that's easy to misinterpret because a mobile device changes IP addresses frequently as you go around, get on Wi-Fi or not. I wouldn't pay as much attention to the IP address as the location, right? If you've never left Chicago, Illinois, and you're seeing accesses from Colorado, okay, then pay a little bit more attention to that. But there's a lot that can be misinterpreted by people who don't understand networking, and not that people have to and shouldn't. But the unfortunate other side of this equation is if you're a private individual, there's no one to protect your privacy but you, because Facebook and all these companies that we've come to rely on, they're in the business of collecting lots of information, right? Their business model is anti-privacy.
Yeah.
So people have to be experts in how to protect their information, despite that really being somewhat unfair because, it can get very technically complex quickly.
Yeah, and I have people send me, not intentionally, but they end up doing it, sending me screenshots of dozens and dozens and dozens of configuration pages on their phone. Well, look, this firmware isn't the right firmware or something like that. I'm like, I don't know what firmware is on your, your obscure Android phone. But look at this IP address. It's, 10 dot da 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 da. Well, that's inside your own network. Don't worry about that. And I think it's kind of once the person crosses the threshold from knowing absolutely nothing to knowing a little bit, that everything that they see kind of leads them, oh my gosh, what's going on? I've been hacked. I've been compromised. I remember when my wife's accounts got compromised and she got notification from the company, hey, we've seen this unusual activity from Iran. Like, okay, well, we definitely haven't been in Iran recently. Okay, time to change your passwords, time to, go through all of that. But we didn't confirm it. Obviously, you never click on the link within the email saying that your account's been compromised. Always go to the website, go to the source and try to confirm it there. But so it absolutely does happen. And like when you're talking about locations and providers suddenly being unusual is a good sign that something is amiss. It at least needs to be looked at more carefully. How is Stalkerware getting on people's devices?
The easy way, it's usually somebody with physical access, right? Very few people are capable of remote installing malware on mobile devices. It does happen, but if you're able to do that reliably, there is lots of intelligence agencies. Pick whatever country you want to be loyal to, and they will pay you lots of money to do that professionally. It's typically outside the range of most people. So it's somebody who's had physical access. Probably it may be somebody who does the kind of a crafted phishing attack, potentially tricking you to install something, or they could just be relying on things that are kind of inbuilt. I'm an iPhone user, right? There's the whole Find My Friends feature. There's the family settings, so I can go see where my children's devices are, right? Which is a perfectly legitimate use case. But somebody could enable that stuff, who is no longer involved with you, and now they're just using a built-in service to follow your movements.
Or someone that you were in a relationship with and you gave them access to that, and when the relationship ended, you forgot to revoke that access.
Right. And I mean, there's lots of different ways that can happen they're obscure. Right? They knew your Apple ID password because they wanted to install an app on to do what's legitimate when you're in a relationship. Okay. Well, now they can log into your iCloud account and see where your phones are, or your tablets or your MacBook. Right. A lot of these technologies have features built in to allow following of movements. When people start referencing that they're seeing text messages, now it's kind of at another level. But usually the kind of person who is following somebody's text messages and their email is doing it for a reason that will lead to other behaviors that make it apparent.
Mm-hmm. And so we're differentiating Stalkerware from kind of the random drive-by malware where you went to a website and got compromised due to some drive-by download. You weren't necessarily, with the exception of where you've been spearphished, most of those cases are just kind of the random drive-by where hackers like, oh, hey, I now have access to a device. I have no idea who the person is. Maybe I can do some damage. Maybe I can annoy them. But the Stalkerware is very intentional of, I'm trying to access this person's activities.
Correct, right. And there's usually some prior relationship, right? You were on the radar for a reason. The ex-wife, ex-husband, ex-dating partner, sister, brother, whatever, right? There was some pre-existing relationship. There is a branch of criminals who just go after women for various sextortion. But Stalkerware is not their usual technique, though it's not outside the realm of possibility that they would use similar tools.
Yeah. So is that where you see most of the Stalkerware that you've dealt with? Is it mostly in kind of relationships, like personal relationships, or corporate relationships?
It's usually personal relationships, right? It's there is corporate espionage that goes on, and some of these tools will dual purpose, right? If I want to follow all the text messages, and emails and get information out of a phone to stalk somebody or to steal corporate secrets, well, it's the same kind of functionality you're looking for. I don't know that there's been a lot of crossover yet, but a lot of nation state actors and espionage operations like using commodity tools because that obfuscates that it's actually somebody serious behind it, right? If you're a corporate executive and you've got a piece of known stalkerware on your phone, you're going to make assumptions about who that is. And it might not be your ex-wife or ex-husband. It might be, the PRC or Russia, or whatever region that might be spying on you. Yeah. The bulk of the cases is obviously it's individuals. There's people that are worth spying on at that level. But there's a whole lot of bitter ex-partners out there who don't want to let a relationship go.
Yeah, that's the much more common equation is a personal disgruntled relationship or someone who's obsessive or won't let things go.
Right. And I said, usually you could suss out that as somebody who's obsessive trying to follow your digital footprints is going to be obsessive about other things too.
Yeah, and vice versa probably.
Yes.
So, traditionally the advice I would give people in just relative privacy is, whenever you can, make sure you've obviously got a password on your phone, that it's not something that you're giving to people, that you've got multi-factor authentication on your bank accounts and your important things, whether it's SMS or token. Something is better than nothing. I believe tokens are better than SMS, but something's usually better than nothing.
Yeah.
Oh, so what kind of specific advice? I mean, we talked about physical access. How, what other ways what other advice would you give someone to keep this from happening to them or at least mitigate the risk?
Yeah, well, you mentioned one with multi-factor auth, though I take a little different twist on it. I mean, yeah, you get a text message or some app that says, hey, do you want to authenticate? But it also gives you warning that somebody else is doing it. You know, it's when I've gone to interesting countries, I create a Gmail account, I put multi-factor off on it, you know, with an intentionally weak password just to catch if I can find that I've been somewhere that managed to get the password to do it, because then I'll get a push notification. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't log into that account because I left that country 2 months ago, and now somebody's logging into it with the correct password. Mm-hmm. So it gives you very quick information, and it's a very useful early warning system. And I've caught the early stages of corporate breaches with that. It's like, hey, this is somebody logging into a service. You know, they have the correct password, but it wasn't me who entered it, and went to the other people had it. Like, no, it wasn't us. Okay, well, we know somebody's got the password. We're going to sit there and cut this person off right here and now before they find another way in. It's
referred to as a honeypot, I believe.
Yeah, in essence, yeah. It's when I do that overseas on myself, yeah, I'm a personal honeypot. You know, here's my device. I'll leave it in the hotel room. Put all the malware you want on it. Infect it with all the things, please, because I'm just going to bring it home and reverse engineer all of it. You're just making my work as a researcher that easy, that much easier. But I'm a special case. Right?
And I was to say, you're definitely a special case. You're looking to get a device compromised in hopes of learning more, whereas me, I don't want a device compromised because I don't want to throw out that, $1,500 iPhone.
Yeah, no, there was a conference I was at that I did have a laptop compromised in. I was passive aggressive about it. I just left the new laptop stickers on it. The saran wrap that they wrap the case in. It's just like, here's a new one because I know you're coming into my hotel. Had a little alarm clock with a camera that pointed, in an odd way to make sure to catch them. They wiped that. But what they didn't infect the laptop with anything. Because I had the slides I was giving my talk on. It's like, well, I mean, you could have gone to the talk, What they did is I used my phone as an alarm clock, but it was like my flight was like 6 a.m. So I had to get up at 4. At like 1 a.m., the alarm goes off. I kind of go tap the phone and go away. 2 a.m., it goes off again. 3 a.m. is like, wait a second. When I hit the phone, it's not muting. It was the laptop that was going off that were basically waking me up every hour before I got on the plane. It's like, oh, you sneaky bastard. Well done, but screw you.
It's kind of the having your friends call the hotel and ask them to set up wake-up calls for you at particularly obtrusive times.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's some of the fun games that can be played on that level. I don't know about fun. I was on the business end of it. But
yeah, when you're in college and high school, it's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Outside of that, it's not very fun.
Yeah. No. So I was able to sleep on the plane. It was all good. So, and that laptop ended up in the Gulf of Mexico because I wasn't going to bring that across a national boundary.
I mean, I've often thought about going to like a black hat conference and thinking, okay, what do I not need to bring? Not just into the conference, but like, what devices am I going to intentionally leave behind and not even let into a hotel room? Am I going to bring effectively a burner credit card? What actions do I need to take to protect myself while I'm at this conference? Definitely don't want to bring my cell phone. Definitely don't want to bring my laptop. Okay, then how do I make this a beneficial trip if I don't have these devices that I would normally have with me?
Yeah. No, I've stopped bringing my laptop to those conferences mostly because I don't want to carry it with me all the time. If I have those kind of devices, I have them with me. But I'm not opening up my laptop, right? That's 18-hour days of going between events and meetings and the after hours party there. It's just, no, I'm not going to bring my laptop case. I'll bring my phone, right? But there's very few people who are able to do much more than interception. And most of my stuff's encrypted, or at least the stuff I care about is. And if they can crack all of that, then I'm dealing with an intelligence agency, and it doesn't really matter where I happen to be, they're going to get me. But a laptop, at a certain point, if I'm not going to use it, and you never do at Black Hat, unless you're a presenter. Actually, I think they give you presentation computers, now that I think about it. So you're not even presenting off your own laptop unless you're doing a demo. And no, don't do a demo and a presentation if you can avoid it. But what I noticed is at Black Hat, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, it was just after somebody did research to say, here's how you can build a home-built Stingray. to enter phone calls. And part of that involves dumping people down to 3G because that's less secure. And then you could do interception of SMS. There were so many people setting that up around the venue that cell service was unusable until you basically had to go about half mile away. So it was, it's so many people put up so many that the Stingrays were intercepting Stingrays, and it just created a blanket of just RF interference.
Yeah. That's the stuff that I would be worried about. Just even being in Vegas proper during a conference like that, you're just kind of like, oh gosh. I see the warnings like don't use ATM machines when you're in Vegas during conferences and all those kind of things.
Yeah, I'm less worried about credit cards. Debit cards is a little bit trickier. Credit card, call up and say, hey, I didn't make this charge. They send me out a new card, whatever, right? I'm not liable for things. Yeah. Debit card's a little tricky because money actually moves, but eventually you get made whole. So it's inconvenience, but it's not awful. And the only reason there's so many ATMs in Vegas is to encourage you to gamble. And, well, to be honest, it's the only place where you can roll up to an ATM with a credit card and get cash because they really want you to gamble.
Yep.
So I guess if you really want to hit the tables, make sure you got your 0% APR or, credit card and go ahead and take a cash advance of a couple grand and, you go hit that blackjack table.
Yeah. Not proper advice, though.
No, just bear in mind the house always wins.
That they do.
If you want to spend $50 or $100, whatever your leisure money is, gambling, then all right, that's just leisure money, whether you go to a show or hang out at a blackjack table. But probably don't get yourself into 20% credit card debt, over that.
Yeah, not a good way to fund your entertainment values.
No.
So back to Stalkerware. So we've gone on a trip. We've left our phone in a room, and someone has gotten into it. Whether we had a password or not, they knew the password. Let's ignore that issue. But they've installed Stalkerware on our phone or our laptop. Mm-hmm. What do we do about it? Is that device burned? Like the only solution is to toss it, or can these things be cleaned and put back to a new state?
A factory reset and resetting all the passwords it is in the overwhelming majority of cases good enough, right? If you wipe the phone, it wipes everything. Again, if somebody gets an infection, it gets you low level where they've infected the factory wipe build that's on the phone. Well, all right, you've got a significant problem that's outside what most people are capable of, right? Mm-hmm. I know like executives will bring special builds of phones that are resilient against that kind of thing. But for the everyday user, a factory wipe and then resetting all of your passwords is largely sufficient. But really making sure that you get everything. And, taking a look. So, for instance, if somebody gets into your Apple phone, you make sure you reset the iCloud password and get an idea of what other devices are on there, their settings that allow you to sync apps between devices. Mm-hmm. So if there's a phone out there that you don't recognize anymore, but syncing apps is the default, where you download an app on one device, it downloads it on all of them. Well, they could just put the malware right back in. Yeah. So it's making sure that all of the places where they can get access is shut off. And I said, I have an Android device. That's just what I use for burn devices. I don't think they have a similar functionality of syncing across devices, but the point remains is, make sure you get to everything and just start resetting passwords to Facebook and all of the other apps that go along with it.
And most of the, Facebook, I know Facebook and Google, at least when you're in that process, you have the ability to force log out any other device that's logged in. That at least buys you some time to start changing stuff on your own before they can get back into the account.
Correct.
And, making sure that accounts aren't linked and all that kind of crazy stuff.
So and definitely, I said, once you start getting real world indications of this, then it's time to, if you've got an order of protection, it's time to go to the judge and talk. If you don't, then it might be time to get a police report. Local police departments are getting better about this because it is a prevalent problem. And there are starting to be more widely available resources to help people that find themselves in that situation.
So maybe a little bit outside of your scope. If you know someone who, you have a client who they know their device has been compromised with Stalkerware, it's been compromised with Stalkerware, but there's no obvious, person of interest, let's say. There's no disgruntled spouse. There's no ex-boyfriend, ex-girlfriend. There's no crazy next door neighbor. You have 100% proof the device has been compromised. Are you able to find out who compromised the device?
With effort, the problem comes in as, right, you're relying on the adversary to make a mistake that otherwise indicates their identity. Mm-hmm. It depends on the software they use. A lot of these tools are licensed, which means there's a transaction somewhere. Now, these companies aren't exactly the type that you could send a discovery order to and they'll give up the customer. But there might be other things that lead you from point A to point B. The unfortunate reality is once you're into that kind of question, then it's a lot of resources have to be expended to figure that out. And some of those require, court orders. And if you got order of protection, you wouldn't have an order of protection in that case because you don't know who it is. So you can go to court and open a case to say, I don't know who this is, but they're doing bad things. But I would say in that case, like I said a few moments ago, hey, you wipe your device, you're fine. The one thing to keep in mind when you wipe the device, you also wipe the evidence. Mm-hmm. So if you want to pursue something criminally, you're with an expert, then you are getting a new phone because then I or somebody like me needs to preserve the evidence.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some ways that we can, get them out in the open to find out who they are. But that may depend on police department interest. Your mileage varies depending on police departments. It depends on the interest of a local prosecutor. The most interest that we get on this kind of stuff is at the high end is how do we take down entire families of stalkerware and the criminal groups behind it, because going after I wouldn't even know, tens of thousands. I don't know how many people are engaged in this kind of behavior just in the U.S., but it's a large number. But there's a small number of people who are making the software and enabling it. And if we're lucky, they have databases of their customers. So we get them and then we get their customers.
It's almost more valuable to go after the drug reference rather than the users or the street corner pushers, going after those that are actually creating the drugs, or in this case, creating the product. If you take them out, then you take out everyone who's using their product potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of loose analogy, right? It's why we have a DEA, is to do big picture stuff that you can make into federal crimes. It's not to get the guy selling dime bags on the street corner. Well, I guess that's legal in most places. Well, marijuana is legal in most places, but the point remains, right? Is the system. I don't know that it works as designed, but the thought was, hey, let's go after this at a large scale. And not worry about the street crime, because there's always going to be another guy who shows up again.
So are there entities that are going after the stalkerware, the malware manufacturer? I use the term manufacturer loosely, but kind of going after that rather than trying to go after the people that are using it to target individuals? Is there some concerted effort going after the people that are producing the products and services?
I mean, there is a group out there, the Coalition Against Stalkerware, that's trying to take people as cybersecurity community, activists, and dealing with like women's shelters and legal aid groups, trying to figure out what can be done about this. One, to provide resources to victims on a one-on-one situation, but what can be done at a larger scale. And part of it is this notion in the United States, right? Is it really illegal to make malware if you're not in the market of selling it? And you put in a disclaimer, hey, don't use this for illegal purposes. Mm-hmm. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, right? But it gets into, where things need to be precise in our law, right? For good reason, right? We don't want to make it easy to prosecute people, who are not being malicious. So that just means there's other checks in place that also make it harder for us to go after authors of stalkerware. There's laws that probably need to be passed and policy, that make it more obvious that this is bad, and we're starting to have cyber stalking laws in many states. But local law enforcement, obviously this is a very different form of policing than, walking a beat or speed traps or other things that police officers are used to. So, I mean, there needs to be resources for local police too. And there's efforts to start trying to build on all of that because there's enough recognition that this is a real problem.
Yeah, I think it's some of the, I think some of the challenges, the legal issues always trail the events that are happening.
Right.
It took a long time for the legal system to adapt to identity theft. I know a relative of mine, his Social Security number was used to earn income in multiple states. And those states sued the fake individual. Of course, the person didn't show up, but the judgment was against my relative because nobody showed up. And so once he found out about it, it was, okay, how do I deal with this? And the only mechanism most of the states had was, well, you have to pay the judgment and then petition to get the money, get the money back after you've proven that it wasn't you. And so laws have changed significantly since then. This was, more than 20 years ago. But I assume the same sort of thing will happen with stalkerware and malicious applications, as the laws will trail 5 to 10 years behind them being widely available or being widely used. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's expertise, there's laws that need to be changed, and the expertise putting it on, detectives and local police departments. There's computer forensic examiners who can examine mobile phones, but I know what my hourly rate is, and it's probably higher than an hourly rate of what a detective makes. And no one really wants to sit there and push, the income they command down the scale. But on the flip side, I mean, this is a real problem. If you're a victim, it can be very devastating, especially when you start dealing with, people who are stealing intimate photos and the kind of extortion that can go on with that as well. People who are not just stalking, but engaging in just overt intimidation and just trying to ruin people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, I've probably talked to more people who are maybe not being intimidated, where there's not really the overt action, but it's kind of the low level. Yeah, someone's obviously getting into my accounts, and it's like, well, how much money are you willing to spend to find out who it is?
Yeah,
and the answer is usually, well, I can't afford anything. Well, then your answer is, like you said, wipe the device and get on with your life. It's a horrible answer in a sense, but it's maybe the pragmatic one.
Yeah, and I don't know what the right answer is there. I mean, there's a technical answer, and then there's the question of I've had this question with people who've gone through divorce and whatever. I mean, what's your objective here? If I could prove it was them after spending a lot of time doing it, they're not going to go to jail over it probably because you gave them permission to access it, 2 years ago, and then they installed this on it. And now I found it and you uninstalled it, and there you go. Because the laws of possession and authorization get murky when somebody did something when they were authorized and then are no longer authorized, or, we're coming up with laws on intimate photos, right? You had consent to have that material. What happens when the relationship ends, right? Common sense would dictate you should delete that stuff. And certainly not post it to the whole ex-girlfriend, ex-wife sharing sites. Yeah. But the laws have taken time to actually accommodate that scenario of revenge porn laws. Mm-hmm. I don't know if all 50 states have them yet, but I know a lot do.
Yeah, definitely heading that direction, and for good reason.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that wasn't envisioned when laws were written, 20, 40, 100 years ago. And it's a new reality we find ourselves in, which is why we have legislative bodies. Yeah. Is to deal with evolving reality and create laws to deal with it.
So speaking of evolving realities, where do you see Stalkerware going in the next couple of years in terms of its capabilities and your capabilities to find and remove it?
I said now that, I mean, there's industry coalitions and other groups getting together saying, hey, we need to do something about this, right? And not, saying, here, wipe your device. We got to do something programmatic about it. Part of that's law. Part of that is having police departments with the right resources. Part of that is having, women's shelters or other community groups that deal with those kind of situations, having resources, and putting effort to it. But, stalking is always, I don't know if it's always, but I mean, it's been a pretty prevalent part of when relationships end for, I don't know, long-term documented history, right? It's not that behavior is not going to go away. There are people who want tools to do that, and there are people willing to make money by providing those tools. So the easy ones are where it's a malicious app on the phone. You just delete the app, right? And that may end your problem aside if you're having to change all the passwords or wipe phones. But, there's money to be made there, which means people are going to be doing, development to make it more discreet and more hidden. And like I said, there's a lot of other ways to do it that don't involve installing Stalkerware, because a lot of these devices keep track of what we're doing. If I can watch your Facebook feed and see where you're going, I don't need to stalk you. I just need to watch. There's lots of information we leak about ourselves all the time, right? There's these smartphones are being put with contact tracing apps or functionality in the devices, which means these devices are emanating a unique token so that it stores a database. Oh, I was around that unique token, which has now got coronavirus, so I know I need to isolate, which all sounds good. But the token's only, beaconed for about 30 feet, give or take. If I've gotten close enough to somebody with not a lot of other people around, I can turn that token into an identity and put sensors around and watch where they go. And then there's just no indication, because unless you happen to find a sensor that's just promiscuously listening to all the Bluetooth tokens and contact tracing apps, then you would have no idea, except that somebody who you used to be in a relationship with or is just creeping on you keeps showing up at places you are in ways that they shouldn't. Or at times in places where they shouldn't. So part of the problem is that, like I said, we're just creating more information leakage in random people under the guise of, I'm not going to say we shouldn't do contact tracing for COVID. We absolutely should. But doing it through phones and something that just beacons out into the air is going to have privacy implications.
Yeah.
And, people don't really understand the difference between anonymous and private, right? The anonymous token that's being beaconed is anonymous. It doesn't tie to your identity, but it's not private because anybody close enough can see it.
Yeah.
Right. And if they could say, oh, that token is that person because that's the only one in the room, now I've just defeated anonymity, and now as long as I see that beacon anywhere that beacon is, I know that person is there because we carry our phones around with us all the time. So every day we're creating new technology that creates new possibilities of people to maliciously abuse it to compromise privacy or, our finances or, any of the thing that criminals will do with electronic means. Good news, unlimited job security for us. That is, it sucks and it's going to suck harder.
Yeah, and I think that's true with any emerging technology. There will be advances that are helpful and beneficial to our lives and advances that, put us at risk. I mean, there's an advantage of having Google Maps know where you are and how to get to places. I remember back to the days where we had paper maps where you wanted to go somewhere. You had to, it's in what city? What page is that? Oh, it's not in this book. I've got to go find someone who's got a map book for the next neighboring city, the next neighboring county or state. And now we just press a button and we have, hey, let's route around the traffic because we know where the traffic is. Well, to get the benefits, we have to give up something in exchange for those. And
there's always a consequence.
And I think, to me, I've always looked at it as these things are not necessarily good or bad. It's you just need to understand what you're giving up to get the service. When you use Facebook, you give up a lot of your personal privacy to be able to connect with your friends. And a lot of the other platforms are the same way. So it's there is an exchange going on somewhere. You just need to know what it is and be okay with it.
Right. And I think, people focus on a lot of the positives and don't realize that that can be drawbacks.
Yeah.
Facebook's an example, right? It's at one point in time I deleted my Facebook and, I ended up recreating it at some point thereafter. But, there was a friend of mine that an occasional acquaintance realized that, her boyfriend had committed suicide, but no idea that it happened because it wasn't on Facebook where she said that. Mm-hmm. So missed out on a tragic event where I would have reached out to somebody had I known.
Yeah.
But every decision has its pros and cons, and you just have to be mindful of which one it is or of what they are and be okay with that. And sometimes there's things you can do to mitigate some of those harms. I only turn on the GPS on my phone of when I actually really need Google Apps or Google Maps, or probably more accurately when I'm ordering an Uber.
Yeah.
And then I turn it off when I'm done.
And
right?
Would you recommend the same thing for Bluetooth?
We have the problem with Bluetooth is we have so many devices, right? If you've got Bluetooth devices, right? I got an Apple Watch, right? Which means I need to have Bluetooth enabled, right? I've got AirPods. I need to have Bluetooth enabled.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an all or nothing thing, right? I mean, you can control what connects to your phone via Bluetooth, but the unique identifiers, well, it's an interesting note. I haven't actually reverse engineered some of these contact tracing apps. Is what happens if you turn Bluetooth off?
Yeah, they don't work.
Does it let you turn Bluetooth off?
Yeah, at least at this point in the U.S., let's say, these apps are voluntary.
Yes.
And if they're using the functionality that both Google and Apple jointly developed, it's all in theory. Let's assume they're not lying to us. If they're lying to us, we have bigger issues. But assuming they're not lying to us, it's all opt-in, easy to opt out, and by turning off Bluetooth, it disables the feature also. Yeah.
Well, the problem with some of that is, and this is a fight on my campus, is right. I'm finishing my PhD at U of I, University of Illinois. And they want to have an Illinois app, on your phone that does contact tracing, and they can mandate it.
Yeah.
Or highly incentivize it. What they're trying to say is, we're going to incentivize people to do this, right? We want contact tracing. That way, you can be safe and whatever. And most people will say, okay, but, early on before COVID, saying, we want to collect all this information to identify people who are needs of intervention to prevent suicide or whatever. But we're going to collect all the information and use machine learning math to go find people who are in trouble. I was like, no. I mean, first, no. As somebody who does machine learning, the idea that you could just let math find people have problems without giving any real thought, no. They say it's privacy by design, but you're collecting all the information. Well, you can make decisions to opt out if you want, but you're going to highly incentivize and coerce people into opting into everything. So there's lots of soft ways to get around that. And the implications of these kind of technologies and tools being available, who can have access, what information can they get, aren't fully understood, even by experts.
Well, I think that's the thing that I would almost worry about more on the locally developed apps, that the local college builds an app for contact tracing students. Okay, well, it's not going to be run by security professionals. Let's say the app is even designed by security professionals, and the app is secure and all that, but there's still a human element of who has access to the data. Mm-hmm. Are they other college students who are trying to find where their girlfriend is, and they're now using a in theory, a legitimate, something that has a legitimate purpose, quote unquote, and misusing it for the purposes of stalking.
Yeah. Well, and part of it is we don't have full knowledge. We don't know how things will go bad. And I'll give you another coronavirus example. I got a machine learning algorithm I developed that is very accurate in saying this domain is malicious, this domain is benign. Then March rolled along and the pandemic hit in full force. And then it was starting to flag public health sites, because governments were just throwing up sites out there to get resources out there, because the cadence of what everybody was doing was higher than everything. Yeah. I don't want to say panic, but we had a real realization that we had a real problem on our hands, and people started doing things quickly instead of doing things right the way you do it in normal times.
It was a fundamental shift in the pattern of what is normal. Nobody's life is quote unquote normal compared to what it was, back in January.
Right. So, I mean, I have the system, right? Developed as, okay, domains are good or bad. I explicitly whitelist popular stuff. So I'm not going to block Facebook or Google or the root servers for DNS. You know, worst thing happens, I get a false positive request or a false negative request, tweak it, whatever, right? You know, nothing catastrophic will happen. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm interfering with public health bodies actually doing public health in a pandemic.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that the cost of an error of my algorithm could have been that high. Yeah. It never would have occurred to me before February of this year that was something that had to be accommodated for.
Well, and I think even a lot of the companies that have used machine learning for a lot of things, they had trip ups in that as well. I know that two of my Twitter accounts got suspended for, gosh, it was almost 90 days. It was effectively a permanent suspension until they realized it was a mistake. But it was because I had, in theory, there was some discussion I had about COVID that crossed some machine learning algorithm threshold that went, oh, this is suspicious. We're not going to look into it. We're just going to terminate the account, not tell the person, not explain why until 3 months later. It's, oh, yeah, there was a machine learning mistake. We've unterminated your account. Sorry.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. That was, but.
Well, let's say they at least I corrected it 3 months later.
Yeah. I mean, but a lot of places wouldn't do, but it just goes to show you, even, I'm not knocking you. You have one person who's working on their own algorithms. You have these massive entities with potentially hundreds of engineers working on stuff. When something so big as coronavirus shifts not just one landscape, but tons of landscapes, it throws off machine learning in a way that they just never intended.
Well, that machine learning does what it's intended to do. It profiles normal and it profiles abnormal. And when everybody changes everything,
everything's abnormal.
Everything's abnormal. Surprise, right? And, I don't think that the price, is fully understood of these things being deployed at wide scale, right? It's, like I said, it wouldn't have occurred to me that interfering with government operations during a pandemic was a risk I had to mitigate.
Yeah.
But we are, right? And that's what technology is enabling, is that errors in technology and security are now taking more serious and more profound consequences. 10 years ago, the notion that malware could get somebody killed, no, it's sci-fi. But now we've got respirators and ventilators running Windows 10 embedded with the same vulnerabilities of a desktop.
Or Windows XP. Yeah, or older.
Yeah, point remains, right? We're adopting, hey, this technology worked good for personal computing. Why do something new? Let's put it in embedded devices that keep people alive. Well, that means when the thing blue screens, somebody stops breathing. We're creating a much more dangerous world where we haven't been really great about protecting information. And now we're putting medical equipment and cyber physical systems on there and, self-driving cars that have to figure out, is this a pedestrian or a crosswalk? Using the same technologies that really weren't good at protecting privacy in the first place.
It's a strange new world that we're living in.
Yeah, unlimited job security,
Yeah, that's a good thing. Spin it on the positive for yourself. Yeah. I mean, we always have to look at it that way. Is it there are benefits for some people and risks for other people. And for those of us who deal with security, these sort of things are of a benefit for us. And I'll be one to admit that, my website has done well and resulted and gotten more traffic because of coronavirus. More people working from home, more people interested in privacy and security. It has driven more traffic to the site. And never would have expected it. Never thought a health emergency would drive traffic to my technical website. How does that make sense? But it's a new world that we're living in. So as we wrap up here, if people are you open to people contacting you if they believe that they're a victim of stalkerware and they want assistance?
Yeah, sure. A more direct way to would be take a look at the Coalition Against Stalkerware. That might have resources more available to you, because I'm one guy in Central Illinois. But certainly I have a contact form at bambenekconsulting.com that people can reach out to, and I'm happy to answer questions or try to direct people to resources if I can.
And if people want to follow you on social media where you have an account that is public?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Bambenek and on LinkedIn as well.
There's a convenience of having a unique name.
Yes. Yeah.
So we'll definitely put links to all those in the show notes, and I really appreciate your time today. Is there any parting advice that you would give our audience?
No, I just be mindful of the technology that you're bringing into your home and what some of the information being collected is and what that means, right? Especially like smart home of Amazon Echoes and, smart appliances and the like, and be mindful of what the information is collected and how it can be used against you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a nice day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Prey podcast. Notes and a transcript of this episode with John Bambenek can be found at easyprey.com/23.